Alright, this is what they wanted. And when it comes to Rick Ross, well, first off, before we even open the door on the mess we are about to walk into, understand one thing. What happened over the last 72 hours in hip-hop was not just a rant, not just a podcast moment, and definitely not just Rozay talking his usual boss talk. What he did was walk straight into the front yard of one of the most protected legacies in the entire music industry, wearing a smile, holding a glass of Luc Belaire, and calling grown men who built empires minions and glazers. So leave a like on this one, because one like is a receipt, and if you hype it up you just doubled it, and you also just doubled the chance we finish this whole story before the next call gets made. Because what happened next is the part nobody is willing to say out loud. Less than 24 hours after Rick Ross puffed his chest out on that camera and told Kareem Biggs Burke's little brother to come kiss the ring, the whole vibe went completely quiet. Not humble. Not thoughtful. Quiet. And then, in a way that had every corner of hip-hop Twitter frozen mid-scroll, he came back on that same camera, cleaned it up, softened it, and dropped one careful little line that told the entire industry the boss had just been bossed. Something happened between those two videos. Somebody made a phone call. And what I am going to walk you through today is the real map of who actually holds the power in this game in 2026, because Rick Ross just accidentally drew it for us. Now, we got to rewind, because if you didn't catch how this started, none of the rest lands. The whole thing kicked off on his own show, on his own microphone, in his own comfort zone, which is where every legend has ever gotten themselves in trouble. He was riding the momentum of that Jay-Z conversation, the one where he said he would take a single dinner with HOV over $500,000 in cash, because inside the first 10 minutes with Jay-Z, he claimed he would already be sitting on $20 million in questions. By the time the oysters showed up, he said it would be a $40 million conversation. And by the time the Belaire was poured, he swore he would be north of $250 million in game absorbed at that table. That clip alone should have run the internet for a week. But he didn't stop there. Because Rick Ross doesn't stop. He pivoted, and he fired at Rory and Mal. Not gently. Not with the wink of a bar. He went at them like they had personally kicked his dog. He called them peons. He called them glazers. He said they were sucking little peons. He laughed about them not having chairs at real tables, not getting real sales, not being invited to the real conversations hustlers on the street were having about real money. And then, in the exact sentence that changed the temperature of this entire situation, he said, and I quote him in spirit, "Tell Big Spurt that the boss is waiting for him to come kiss the ring." Now here is the part where a lot of people online got it wrong, because a lot of people online do not do their homework. Big Spurt was Rozay's little playground nickname for a man named Kareem Biggs Burke. And Biggs is not a podcaster. Biggs is not a co-host. He is not somebody you tell to come kiss anybody's ring. Kareem Biggs Burke, alongside Jay-Z and Damon Dash, co-founded Roc-A-Fella Records. He financed the operation when it had no backing. He helped push reasonable doubt into the world. He sat in the rooms where the culture we are all quoting today was quietly being drafted on napkins. And the man that Rick Ross was mocking, Mal, is not a random. Mal is Big's little brother. So this wasn't a spat with a podcaster. This was talking sideways at the family of a founding partner of Jay-Z. That is a very different sport, and he found that out the hard way. Because here is the good news that turned into the bad news. The good news is he got the clip he wanted. The clip went everywhere. The clip trended. It got him on every timeline for a solid afternoon, which, in this current version of the music business, is basically all any rapper wants. The bad news, however, showed up quietly. It showed up in the DMs. It showed up in the group chats. It showed up on the phone he keeps close, because he has been in this game long enough to know when the phone is ringing for a reason. And this phone was ringing for a reason. Let me walk you through what people inside this world are actually saying, because this is where the real story lives. According to multiple industry voices who have been in the room for exactly these kinds of moments, Rick Ross got the kind of phone call that legends only get once or twice in an entire career. The kind where the number on the screen is short, the voice on the other end is quiet, and the sentence you hear is even quieter than the voice. Rozay, you're gonna clean this up. That's it. That's the entire call. There is no yelling. There is no drama. There is no threat. There is a single instruction, delivered in the tone that men who built empires use when they don't want to repeat themselves. And when a man like Kareem Biggs Burke gets brought up, in the tone he was brought up in, that phone call gets placed. Every single time. Now I want to be surgical here, because we are not in the business of making things up. Nobody has walked outside and put a receipt on the table that says Jay-Z himself dialed him directly. Nobody has confirmed that. Nobody has shown paperwork. Nobody has leaked audio. What we know for a fact, what is on camera, what is documented, is that the tone changed. Rozay went from calling Biggs a big spurt and telling him to kiss the ring to going back on that same camera and saying, and I paraphrase very carefully, "Hey Biggs, you got somebody that loves you. You got somebody that really loves you." I'ma leave it at that. That is not the same man. That is not the same energy. That is not the same boss. That is a man who got a very specific message delivered in a very specific way, and being the professional he is, he absorbed it and cleaned up the mess without needing anyone to say it twice. And this is where the story cracks wide open. Because once fans caught the shift, once the internet stitched those two clips together and put them side by side, the entire narrative of the week flipped. It wasn't Rick Ross is going crazy on Rory and Mal anymore. It was Rozay got sat down. It was he got told. It was he just retracted a statement in real time on camera and thought we wouldn't notice. And here is the part that made it worse, or better, depending on which side of the timeline you are living on. He didn't just soften. He specifically named Kareem Biggs Burke. He specifically softened the language around Biggs. He specifically left Rory alone in the cleanup. He specifically left Mal alone in the cleanup. He zeroed in on Biggs and Biggs only, which tells you exactly who the phone call was about. You know what that means, right? That means whoever picked up the phone had no interest in Rory. That means whoever picked up the phone had no interest in Mal as a podcast personality. That means whoever made that call was speaking on behalf of one name and one name only, and that name was Kareem Biggs Burke. And there is only one circle in the entire music industry that makes a call like that on behalf of Biggs. That circle has one address, and it is not on a podcast set. It is in the office where reasonable doubt was mapped out. It is in the office where Jay-Z, Biggs, and Damon Dash built something that outlived every trend that tried to bury it. Now, the funny part, and by funny I mean the part that made everyone online lose their minds, is that Rick Ross doubled back on camera and delivered a line that on the surface sounded like more boss talk. He said, "Beautiful day to be a boss." That's the line. On paper, it's tough. On paper, it's classic Rozay. But savvy viewers, and the internet is nothing if not savvy right now, caught the shift underneath it. His eyes were different. His shoulders were different. His cadence was different. The bravado was still there, but the bravado was wearing a leash. And that leash, whether we can prove who is holding it or not, was very clearly being held by somebody Rick Ross respects more than he respects his own microphone. That is a big statement. Because he respects that microphone a lot. And this is where I have to be honest with you, because this is the part they don't want us to say. The reason this story is not going away, the reason it is still bubbling on every timeline, the reason we are still talking about Rick Ross and Kareem Biggs Burke a full news cycle later, is because he accidentally reminded the entire audience that in 2026, in this current version of hip-hop, there is still a chain of command. There is still a room above the room. There is still a table above the table. And Rick Ross, for all of his platinum plaques, for all of his mansions, for all of his Wingstop money, for all of his Bel Air empire, is not sitting at the highest table. He is at a very high table. He is at a table most rappers would kill to sit at. But there is a table above that, and last week he found out exactly where that table is. Now, let's talk about what makes this even more layered, because this is exactly why this story exploded the way it did. Biggs is not just a Roc-A-Fella co-founder. Kareem Biggs Burke has a very specific reputation in the streets and in the industry, and that reputation is important context. He did his time. He did it quietly. He did it without cooperating with anyone. He walked back out on the other side with his integrity fully intact, his name still respected in every borough, and every one of his old partners still in his corner. That is rare. That is the kind of resume that gets you a lifetime pass in a community that does not give lifetime passes to anybody. So when Rick Ross opened his mouth and started poking at his tax history, at his alleged old weed cases, at his supposed lack of business exposure, he was not just talking about a rich guy. He was talking about a name that a whole generation of hustlers, executives, and artists have quietly protected for 2 full decades. And he should have known better. Because here is the twist that the internet remembered right when Rozay was in full swing. Rick Ross himself, before he became the boss, before Maybach Music Group, before Port of Miami, before the beard, before the Ciroc bottles, before the yachts, worked as a correctional officer. That is documented. That is public. That is verified. And in the same monologue where he was talking down at Biggs, a man who did his time and never spoke a word, the internet quietly did the math. And the math was ugly. The math said, wait a minute, the guy talking about tax cases and old bags of weed is the same guy who used to wear a uniform and keep the keys. That contrast alone would have been enough to sink the entire monologue. He didn't need to add Jay-Z's inner circle into the equation to make this worse. He did that on his own. So now the tension is stacked. And this is where the pressure cooker really starts hissing. Fans were watching every second. Analysts were dissecting every syllable. Podcasters were carving the clips into 30-second slices and running them into the ground. And the biggest question on everybody's screen was very simple. Did Rozay really just do that? Because a lot of people, especially the newer fans who came in during the streaming era, don't fully understand what Kareem Biggs Burke means. But the older heads, the ones who bought Reasonable Doubt on CD, the ones who watched Roc-A-Fella turn into an empire, the ones who saw Biggs stand quietly in the background while Jay-Z and Damon Dash absorbed all the flash, those heads knew immediately. Rick Ross had lit a fuse. And you already know what happened next. The fuse burned. The fuse burned fast. The fuse burned all the way to the front door. And somewhere between the first video and the second video, somebody with a lot of respect and no need to raise their voice made his phone light up. Whether that somebody was Jay-Z personally, whether that somebody was somebody speaking on behalf of Biggs, or whether that somebody was somebody speaking on behalf of the entire Roc-A-Fella legacy, the effect was the same. Rozay recalibrated. He went from kiss the ring to you got somebody that really loves you. That is not a small shift. That is one of the biggest tonal U-turns we have watched a rapper of his caliber perform on camera in the last decade, and it happened in less than a day. Now, there is another layer I have to add, because if we skip it we are doing the story a disservice. Rick Ross has also been publicly aligned with Damon Dash lately. He has been showing love to Damon in interviews, echoing his talking points about ownership, about entrepreneurship, about the way the machine really works. And anybody who has followed hip-hop for more than 5 minutes knows the history between Damon Dash and Jay-Z is, to put it politely, layered. It is not war. It is not peace. It is something in between that neither side has ever fully explained. So when Rozay starts openly cheerleading for one side of that split and then, in the same news cycle, jabs at Kareem Biggs Burke, the man who was the third pillar of that entire empire, you can see how the picture reads. It doesn't read like a coincidence. It reads like a stance. And stances get answered. But, and this is where I have to protect the truth, we cannot say for certain that anybody in the Jay-Z circle told Rick Ross to sit down. There is no confirmed audio. There is no confirmed screenshot. There is no confirmed statement. What there is, and this is what fuels the whole conversation, is a very obvious behavioral shift on camera. He was one temperature in the first video. He was a completely different temperature in the second video. And in the entertainment business, that kind of shift, that quickly, from a man of his stature, almost never happens without a private conversation happening first. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is just how this business has always worked. From Kanye West's very public splits with entire companies, to Jay-Z's decades of quiet realignments behind the scenes, to a dozen other examples we could name. We have watched over and over again how a single phone call can change a rapper's entire posture without a single tweet being sent about it. And that brings us back to Rick Ross, because he is not a rookie. He has been through label politics, through beef, and through the machine before. He knows the difference between a spat with a podcaster and a situation with a boardroom. And the fact that he backed off exactly one name, Kareem Biggs Burke, and only that name, tells you he knew exactly where the water got too deep. He didn't apologize to Rory. He didn't apologize to Mal as a co-host. He didn't apologize to Joe Budden. He didn't apologize to any of the other names that got splashed. Rozay apologized, softly and specifically, to Biggs alone. And that surgical precision is the part that has the streets convinced this wasn't just a rapper getting quiet on his own. Something happened. Something specific. Something adult. Now let's zoom out, because the internet has already run with this, and it is not letting go for a while. Every clip has been dissected. Every gesture has been slowed down. Every syllable has been replayed. And what everyone keeps coming back to is that one phrase, "Beautiful day to be a boss." Delivered in a tone that sounded less like the roar Rozay usually gives and more like the sigh of a man who had just been reminded that being a boss and being the boss are two very different things. In this version of hip-hop, being a boss means you get to drop the album, throw the party, buy the chain, park the Maybach, and post the vacation. But being the boss, capital T, means somebody has to answer the phone when you call, and everybody else has to check the phone in case you're the one calling. Rick Ross is a boss. Biggs is closer to the boss than most of the industry wants to publicly admit. And Jay-Z, whether or not HOV personally lifted a finger this week, is quietly still the boss, and everyone in the room knows it. That is the real story. That is the story that outlasts the meme cycle. That is the story the podcasters are still going to be chewing on next month. Because this wasn't about Rozay versus Rory and Mal. This wasn't about him versus a podcast. This wasn't even really about him versus Biggs. This was about the invisible wiring of power in a genre that pretends to be flat, but is actually vertically stacked in ways very few artists ever get to see. And Rick Ross, for one bad afternoon, forgot which floor he was standing on. Then he remembered. And the whole world got to watch him remember in real time. So the question we are all left with, and I want you to sit with this one, because this is the question the industry itself is quietly asking, is very simple. Did he back down because he reflected? Did he back down because the fan reaction snapped him back into character? Did he back down because his team pulled him aside and said, "Rozay, you're a legend, act like it"? Or did he back down because a phone lit up, a name popped on the screen, and he realized in one breath that the ring he told Biggs to kiss actually belonged, at least symbolically, to somebody sitting a floor above the one he was standing on? We may never get a paper trail. We may never get a receipt. We may never get the audio. But we got the behavior, and the behavior told the whole story. And this is why hip-hop is still, even after everything, the most cinematic genre on the planet. Because in a matter of 24 hours, we watched a full 3-act drama play out on camera, with no script, no director, and no editor. Act 1, Rick Ross swaggered up to the wrong door. Act 2, the wrong door quietly opened, and something came out that we didn't get to see. Act 3, he walked back to the exact same camera, in the exact same setup, and softened the exact same name, and the entire internet was left standing there with its mouth open trying to piece together what had just been quietly settled off camera. That is the power of the Roc-A-Fella name, still in 2026. That is the power of Kareem Biggs Burke's reputation, still in 2026. That is the power of Jay-Z's silence, still in 2026. And that is a lesson every young rapper watching this needs to write down. Because here is what Rozay accidentally taught every artist under 30 this week. It doesn't matter how many followers you have. It doesn't matter how many albums you have moved. It doesn't matter how many clips of yours have gone viral. If you speak the wrong name in the wrong tone at the wrong table, the phone is going to ring. And it is not going to ring loud. It is going to ring soft. Because the men holding the real power in this culture do not need to raise their voice. They just need to dial. And when they dial, even Rick Ross, at the height of his boss era, at the peak of his Bel Air empire, at the summit of his Wingstop kingdom, straightens up and cleans up the mess. He did it in less than 24 hours. That is not weakness. That is not a loss. That is a real boss doing exactly what a real boss does when the actual boss reaches out. He showed grown man behavior. He corrected it. He moved on. But the lesson, the receipt, the map of the rune, is now permanently drawn. And you know what makes this even sweeter for the culture? The fact that Biggs, throughout this entire storm, never said a single word. He did not tweet. He did not post a video. He did not go on anybody's podcast. He did not call any radio station. He did what he has done for the entire length of his public life, which is stay quiet, stay classy, and let the situation solve itself. That is a masterclass. That is the kind of stillness that only comes from a man who already knows how the story is going to end before the story even starts. He didn't need to swing. He didn't need to answer. He didn't need to respond. Because he, unlike Rozay this week, was already sitting exactly where he needed to sit. Now let me get honest with you for a second, because I know some of you are Rick Ross fans first and hip-hop fans second, and I respect that. He is a legend. He has earned that title. He has put together a body of work most rappers can only dream about. He has built brands. He has invested. He has cultivated a whole generation of MMG artists. He has been a real presence in this culture for 2 full decades, and none of what happened this week erases any of that. This is not a takedown. This is a reality check. Even at the peak of his powers, he has a ceiling in this industry. And the ceiling isn't set by the fans. It isn't set by streaming numbers. It isn't set by Billboard. It is set by the very small, very old, very quiet group of men who have been running this thing since before half of us knew what Roc-A-Fella was. He found that ceiling this week. He bumped his head on it. He straightened his crown and kept walking. That is honestly the most Rick Ross ending we could have gotten. But do not let anybody, and I mean anybody, tell you this was just a random walk back. Do not let anybody tell you he just had a change of heart. Because if he just felt bad, he would have apologized to everybody he ever mocked in that monologue. He would have apologized to Rory. He would have apologized to Mal for the Peons line. He would have apologized to Joe Budden by name. He would have gone on a whole tour of accountability. He did none of that. He zeroed in, laser-focused, on Kareem Biggs Burke, and only him, and delivered the softest, most careful, most respectful cleanup he has offered any human being on camera in years. That is not random. That is not accidental. That is targeted. And targeted behavior always has a target setter. So here we are. The dust hasn't fully settled. The clips are still circulating. The commentary is still coming. And the streets are still doing what the streets do, which is compare, contrast, and connect the dots. Was there a phone call? Almost certainly. Was that call from Jay-Z himself? Nobody outside a very short list can confirm that, and nobody on that short list is going to say a word about it. Was the call effective? The answer is on camera, in high definition, playing on a loop across every social platform on Earth. He took the note. He corrected the record. He reminded everybody, including maybe himself, exactly how this real machine works when the machine decides to move. And now, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one last thought, because this is the part that separates the casual viewer from the real student of the game. What happened between Rozay and Kareem Biggs Burke this week is not an isolated event. It is a rerun of every quiet correction that has ever happened in this culture. Every time an artist has spoken sideways about a name they shouldn't have, this exact sequence has played out. First the loud statement, then the loud reaction, then the quiet call, then the quiet correction, then the pretending it never happened. This is the oldest choreography in the entire industry, and Rick Ross, whether he wanted to or not, just gave us the freshest, cleanest, best-lit demonstration of it we have had in years. That is why this story hit different. That is why it stayed. That is why it is still trending as I record this. Because deep down, whether we want to admit it or not, we all just watched the invisible chain of command in hip-hop reveal itself for exactly one afternoon, and then click quietly back into place, like it never opened at all. So with that said, let me know. What do you actually think happened? Do you think Rozay backed down because he saw the reaction and course-corrected on his own? Do you think Biggs' team reached out and handled it privately, class act style, the way Kareem Biggs Burke has always handled everything? Or do you think, and be honest, that Jay-Z himself picked up the phone, delivered one sentence, and reminded him exactly which ring is the real one? Drop it in the comments, because this conversation is only getting bigger, and your take might flip somebody else's understanding of what really went down. If you made it to this point, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and hype it up while you're at it. It genuinely makes a huge difference. And if you want to see something right before this, there is another story bubbling right now that ties directly into this same corner of the industry, and you are going to want that context before the next chapter drops. Check that one out next, and I will see you in the very next video.